After the fall of France in World War II, many pondered what direction the Axis powers would strike next. Germany was in a tentative alliance with the Soviet Union and allied with Italy, with no major power standing on the continent to contain their power. Britain feared that its homeland would be the next to be struck and possibly even occupied. Yet the British homeland never did get occupied, kind of. And the next nation to face the wrath of the Axis powers tends to not be discussed much during the telling of World War II, and its impact during the war has largely been forgotten, but not today. In today's video, we will be covering the invasion of Yugoslavia. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia, formed in 1918, was originally under the name of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenians, which incorporated diverse national and religious groups with various historical backgrounds. There were three main religions that dominated certain regions and cultures of the state, those being the Orthodox in the northeast, Catholics in the northwest, and Islam in the south. Yugoslavia was politically weak from the moment of its creation, and it would remain so during the interwar period. This was mainly due to a rigid system of centralism which was imposed by the Vidovin Constitution, the first constitution of the state. The aforementioned strong association between each national group and its dominant religion and uneven economic development only worsened matters. The democratic government in the state was plagued by party opposition, and many bills would be blocked from being passed on the floor merely in opposition of one ethnic group or another. This opposition would nearly boil over into civil war when one of the Croat representatives, Stepan Radic, was shot dead during deliberation by another member of the legislation. In response to the crisis that was triggered by the assassination of Radic, King Alexander abolished the Constitution on January the 6th of 1929. He would prorogue the parliament and would introduce a dictatorship over the nation. One of the first acts of the new regime was to carry out a purge of the civil service, with upwards of 1/3 being fired by May of the same year. This was all done supposedly in an attempt to address complaints about rampant corruption in the bureaucracy, and so he solved that by removing the bureaucracy. He would officially change the nation's name to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and he comprised the government districts of the kingdom, compacting it from 33 separate divisions down to only 9, with 6 of them being a Serbian majority. Both internal and external pressure forced Alexander to establish a new constitution in 1931, but the power of the public government had been weakened heavily, as he was able to place over half the upper house without any public support, had the ability to bypass a chamber if he supported a bill, and he transferred heavy amounts of executive power to the king, which was himself, the king. Good old democracy, eh? By 1933, Alexander had started to become worried about Germany, and he worked to build up a Balkan alliance to act as a bulwark against the Germans. The main reason for this was that Italy and Yugoslavia had wanted to prevent the German annexation of Austria, something that both nations at the time heavily opposed. During the 1933 push attempts in Austria, both nations pledged a guarantee of war against Germany if German troops should enter Austria. However, Alexander's life would come to a quick end. As a result of the previous death of 3 family members on Tuesdays, Alexander would refuse to undertake any public functions on that day of the week. However, on October the 9th of 1934, which was a Tuesday, he did not have a choice, as he was arriving in France to strengthen the two countries' alliance in the Little Entente. And lo and behold, he had a right to be concerned, as while Alexander was being slowly driven in a car, a gunman by the name of Lado Cheromneski stepped from the street and shot the king twice with a Mauser C96 pistol. Alexander would die in the car, slumped backwards in the seat, with his eyes wide open. The death of Alexander was one of the first assassinations captured on film. The shooting occurred in front of a cameraman who was only a few meters away at the time, and while the exact moment of the shot was not captured, the events leading to the assassination and the immediate aftermath were, as shown here. The assassination heavily worsened relations between Yugoslavia and France, and both the Balkan Pact and Little Entente lost a lot of importance and influence following this. Paul Karađorđević acted as regent for Paul II, and he would sit in that role until 1941. Paul would see the nation through the start of World War II, and it was worried that due to the Italian failure in the invasion of Greece, that Germany would need to aid the Italians with Yugoslavia directly in the way. Germany had pressured the nation to join onto the Triple-Entente Pact, the Axis alliance, on March the 23rd of 1941, much to the dismay of the British. But they did have a plan in the event that such a thing was to happen. A faction of the Yugoslavian officer class was pro-Allied, and they staged a coup against Paul, putting in place the younger Peter II. The coup would go off with no bloodshed, and Peter ascended officially to the throne with a massive swell of popularity across the nation, and the ratifying of the alliance treaty with the Axis was postponed. This was met with a massive amount of anger from Hitler, who brought his military officers together to draw up a plan to invade the nation without delay. And they had planned to draw in the Hungarians, the Italians, and the Bulgarians to aid in their invasion. While Peter's government attempted to keep things peaceful, it wasn't meant to be, and Yugoslavia would be invaded on April the 6th of 1941. At the start of the invasion, Yugoslavia, fully mobilized, was able to put onto the field 28 infantry divisions, 3 cavalry divisions, and 35 independent regiments. Of the independent regiments, 16 were in the frontier fortifications, and 19 were organized as combined detachments around the size of a reinforced brigade each. The nation also had around 4,000 artillery pieces. Many of them were aged and horse-drawn, but around 1,700 of these were relatively modern. The mechanized units within the army were a bit more bare bones though, as they were limited to 6 motorized infantry battalions in the 3 cavalry divisions, 6 motorized artillery regiments, 2 tank battalions which were equipped with 110 tanks each. One of these battalions had Renault FT models of World War I origin, and the other had 54 modern Renault R35 tanks, which would outperform Panzer IIIs to a large extent. They also had an additional tank company that comprised of 8 Czech SID tank destroyers. The Yugoslavian Navy consisted of only 3 destroyers, 4 submarines, and a dozen patrol craft. The Axis invasion would come along 5 fronts, with Germany, Italy, and Hungary sending forces into the nation. The German formations committed to the invasion of Yugoslavia included over 337,000 men, 875 tanks, and 740 other armored vehicles. Of the tanks, around half of them were of the 38T variety, with a handful of Panzer Is and IIs in the mix as well. For an air contingent, the Germans fielded around 300 fighters, 90 light bombers, and 30 medium bombers, with around 500 of supporting craft. The Italians amounted to around 22 divisions, which would number some 300,000 men, supplemented by 100 various tanks and 700 aircraft. In addition, the Italian Navy levied around 3 destroyers to contain the Yugoslavian Navy, but limited action occurred on the sea. The Hungarian forces numbered around 9 brigades, but the exact numbers are not that well known. The invasion would start on April the 6th, largely from Romanian territory, with German forces marching towards Belgrade. German bombing runs were also conducted on the capital, which heavily paralyzed and slowed down Yugoslav military command and movements. The first main battle took place at Nice on the 6th, with the Yugoslavian army being quickly removed from their defenses, and did what they could to slow down the advancing Germans. The Germans also invaded from Austrian territory, as well as Hungarian territory, with these two columns making a quick gains on grounds towards Belgrade. On the 7th, the Italians launched their own invasion from Italian-held Albania and from the Slovenian border, quickly capturing towns in mainland Slovenia, as well as making heavy gains along the Adriatic coast. On April the 12th, the Hungarians would invade themselves, facing once again limited resistance outside of the frontier attachments. Also on the 12th of April, the Germans would officially occupy Belgrade, defeating the bulk of the Yugoslav army that was in their way, and from that point, German forces would spread out occupational control in northern and central Yugoslavia, facing little in the way of resistance once again. The Yugoslavians did have a plan in place for this style of invasion, and they had planned to retreat on all fronts and move the forces that they could to the south. Once in position, they were to do a combined invasion of Italian-held Albania with Greek forces, linking up with them and British forces that were moving in. It was hoped that such a feat would recreate something similar to the Salonika front during the First World War, where the Axis forces would not be able to dislodge an Allied foothold in southern Europe, but even well-laid plans always run into difficulties. One of the main aspects needed for the Yugoslavians was that of time, and time was something that they did not have whatsoever. A large section of the military rebelled against the government, especially the Croat and Slovenian units, and this allowed the invasions from the north and northeast to face little in the way of organized resistance. The reason for these ethnic rebellions was largely due to the overbearing control that the Serbs had in both the government and in the military. Of around the 200 officers in the Yugoslav army, all but 4 of them were Serbs, and we already talked a little bit about the government's problems that faced the nation earlier, so I'm not going to get into it even more here. They did manage to make some progress into Albania, but after only 2 days, they needed to halt their advance, being surrounded by enemy units, and they had no route in sight. The Axis victory was swift and complete, and on April the 14th, the Yugoslav High Command had decided to seek an armistice, with it being ratified by the 18th. The nation would have large swaths of territory annexed by the invading powers, and 3 puppet states would be left in its wake. Yet the people would not stop fighting. 2 rebel factions, the Partisans, a largely communist-leaning group supported by the Soviets and the Chechnyaks, and a royalist/right-wing faction that was largely supported by the British, American, and Serbian populations. And these forces would play a major role in shaping the narrative and direction of Yugoslavia after the end of World War II, but that is a tale for another time. I hope you all enjoyed the brief look into one of the more forgotten campaigns during World War II. If there's a topic that you'd like me to cover in the future, say so down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all next time.